Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest, a returning guest. His name is Russ Winter, and he runs a site with great research. He has just so many articles on there, but I came across one article that I was particularly interested in. It was about the Jonestown Massacre and looking at it as a kind of brainwashing experiment. And I've done a lot of kind of mind control. I'm looking through a lot of the old files of Jolly and West right now and really kind of keying in. I've done some other CIA material that will be upcoming research into Ewan Cameron, and also the idea that James Earl Ray, who was ostensibly the killer of Martin Luther King, whose anniversary of his death was recently, was actually a mind-controlled person, somebody who'd been brainwashed, which is really hard to believe. But if you look at his life, it's less difficult to comprehend that he did very strange, weird stuff, like somebody who wasn't under his own volition. But I've also covered Jim Jones with another author. His name is Michael Flynn, and his book was Cult City. So I'll put that alongside this talk on my podcast so you can look at that. And Russ and I talked back in December of 2021. We covered what I called the title of our talk, Mind Control America, because he's done other articles and research into this problem. He actually covered really interesting, which I saw on his website, was something that I covered, which is the Juarez women femicide. And he came up with some facts. Yeah, so great job on that too, because I saw you came up with facts I did not come up after even reading those two books. Like, you had stuff. So kudos to you that I were excellently researched. So you can check those out as well. And my talk about the Juarez, I'd read two books about the Juarez femicide deaths. You can listen to that earlier on my stream. But again, we're going to talk about an article he wrote titled The Jonestown Massacre, a horrific Tavistock-style brainwashing experiment. So Russ Winter, welcome back to the show. Thanks for agreeing to the interview.
Good to be back.
Awesome.
If you want to kind of get the gist of the title of the article, I have another article called The Tavistock Method of Brainwashing in Social Psychiatry, which I think was applied here. And the idea is to induce a regressive state and through passivity through alienation. And that's clearly what James Jones is all about. I mean, he was highly skilled in that. It's kind of this group dynamics, this Gestalt method of kind of tearing down the leadership of any group and weakening the group so that it didn't have a strong core, and then you can kind of meld the group into a passive state. And he did it through manufacturing boogeyman terror. And where do we hear that today? So I think he was like almost like a model for where we are today on a grander scale.
No, you're really right. I mean, they say that I saw this thing about breaking down this mass formation psychosis, and it was alienating people and putting them into small groups. Is exactly what happened during the pandemic, right? We couldn't communicate or see other people or talk with them. So I think that it's very timely. This article that you wrote applies to today. And can you kind of talk about, so the Tavistock, maybe some people aren't familiar with this Tavistock group that came out of the UK. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
It's like I say, it's to induce regressive mental states, atomizing individual, producing called lability. In other words, creating passivity by fostering this alienation. And the hack, I believe he was a hack, Walter Lippmann, identified the target in his book, Public Opinion, and I'll just quote him because he says it pretty well. The mass of absolutely illiterate, of feeble-minded, gross, neurotic, undernourished, and frustrated individuals is very considerable, much more considerable there is reason to think that we generally suppose. Thus, a wide popular appeal is circulated among people who are mentally children or barbarians whose lives are a morass of entanglements and peoples whose vitality is exhausted. So that's coming from one of the leading hack. I call him a hack. He was a journalist of his time. That's what he thought of the plebes, so to speak. And so he concludes that the coordination of public opinion can be managed by a specialized class. So that's your so-called elite. I don't use the term elite. I don't like that term, but he says it operates through quote unquote intelligence bureaus. And so he's literally writing the book. And then you have Theodore Adorno, who talked about the use of new technology and how people are primitive. He said they're not childlike, but they're childish, and their primitivism is not that of the undeveloped, but that of the forcibly retarded. So these guys had total disdain for the public, and right. I don't know. Sometimes I can kind of see why.
Right, but they're not looking at the public as people they're trying to educate, edify, or lift up. They're looking to manipulate them, right? So I think that's really the core issue of those guys. Lippmann was a very famous journalist for his time, if I remember.
Yes, and so the key to this brainwashing is the creation of a controlled environment in which stress is introduced to redo individuals' belief structures, and they use peer pressure. The cancel culture is a good example of that. That's what the cancel culture is all about. From other group members, the individual is cracked and a new personality emerges with new values. And the degrading experiences causes the person to deny that any change has taken place. And that way the individual is brainwashed without the victim knowing what has taken place. And I think that's what James Jones tried to do. Now, his attempt to get these people to supposedly commit suicide, I think he kind of failed at that, because when I look at the case, and we can go over some of the particulars of the murder, I think it was a murder scene. I don't think that he really got too many of them. I mean, you have to realize that they were stranded out there in the middle of nowhere. They were being literally tortured, a lot of abuse. Right. He would sodomize the men. He would beat them. He was a sadist. There's one tape of him that you can see on an ABC News clip. It's where he just laughs. He has a cackle. He sounds like Kamala Harris cackling as they're beating the crap out of somebody. So he had these people under the control of this so-called Red Brigade, who were armed goons. They didn't all. I would say very few of them went voluntarily to their deaths. That's my feeling on that.
I don't think you're totally out of far field or something like that, because other people have said that the bodies were stacked. A lot of them were found with syringe marks, so that kind of shows involuntary. And they structured that day when the massacre took place, because I was watching a really interesting discussion with former members. It had David Talbot, who also wrote The Devil's Chessboard about Alan Dulles, but they were talking about Jim Jones. They intentionally sent the basketball team, the men, out away from the event. So it didn't come at random that night that everybody, I think 800 people were murdered. It was a structured, planned event. It seemed like he was building up to that.
Yeah, so that may have been the goal of the controllers, to try to do this revolutionary suicide, is what they called it. That they attempted it, but there weren't any. I mean, it's just a real cover up too of the whole. Let's kind of go over some of the cover up a little bit. They didn't do autopsies. They did like 7 autopsies out of all of them, and they kind of destroyed the innards. They ripped them up, just buried them in unidentified graves. I mean, right. You would think that an event of that magnitude would be really closely investigated in some detail.
Right. It's a huge event. I mean, all those people had relatives in the Bay Area or wherever, right? So Jim Jones went from the Midwest to Ukiah, and then Jonestown, which was really kind of just carved out of the jungle in Guyana, right?
Yeah, the other thing, there's actually surviving memos. So there's this operator he had made the name of Dr. Schacht, who was a recovering meth addict and Jones's bisexual boyfriend. And he ran the drugging program. So here's what the memo says. This gives you some clues. Cyanide is one of the most rapidly acting poisons. I had some misgiving about its effectiveness, but further research have gained more confidence in it, at least theoretically. I would like to get about 2 grams to a large pig to see how effective our batch is, so we don't get stuck with a disaster that would occur if we use thousands of pills to sedate the people. It goes on and says that we can reverse it. But then they kind of changed their minds and kind of went with bullets. And rather than syringe, they did some syringes, but they also did a lot of it with empty syringes. So there was all these empty syringes all over the place where they would force it down people's mouths. And so I have in my article the plotting, the conspiracy that went around behind the scene. And so the second one, this lady named Schauken, Phyllis Schauken, who was one of his flying monkeys, said that we will, when the time comes that we will meet as a group in the pavilion surrounded by highly trusted security with guns. Names will be called out randomly. People will be escorted to a pace of dying by a strong personality. And she lists some people who are supportive but not sympathetic. The victim are accompanied by two strong security men with guns. She says, I don't trust people to arrange their own death any more than I trust somebody to put themselves on the learning crew for 2 weeks, but both could be arranged by outside pressure and no alternatives left open. So that's exactly how they did it. Now, Mark Lane was there, the famous conspiracy theorist. He was there as an eyewitness, escaped, went into the woods or the forest, and he essentially said they were murdered.
Right. So he wasn't the only one, and it happened after Leo Ryan flew to Jonestown, right?
Yeah, he came in. Leo Ryan came into Jonestown, met with the group. Didn't seem to go too well. Some people tried to leave with him, and they returned to the airfield at the nearby port. The port was like about 6 miles away where the airfield was, and were followed by some of Jim Jones's goons who shot the place up and killed Ryan. Now, when we were coming on the air, we were talking about Ryan's role in all this. And like you mentioned to me, he was passionately anti-CIA. And so everybody thought that the agency had killed him. And he had just introduced the Hughes-Ryan Amendment to push for more controls and transparency over the CIA. And then 2 years later, before the House Foreign Affairs Committee on International Operations, Ryan's legislative assistant, Joel Helsinger, testified that the CIA had a covert operation in Guyana and that Ryan's investigation into the operation would embarrass the CIA by linking Jones to some of the agency's most volatile programs and operations. So where the heck did Jones and his minions, his flying monkeys, get these enormous amounts of drugs? They had enough there's enough drugs on the scene. Guyanese troops discovered a large cache of drugs, enough to drug the entire population of Georgetown, Guyana, over 200,000 people for more than a year. The drugs were being used to control the population of only 1,100 people. One footlocker contained 11,000 doses of Thorazine, a dangerous tranquilizer. Drugs used in the testing for MK Ultra were found in abundance. Sodium pentothal, chlorohydrate, a hypnotic, Demerol, thallium, which confuses thinking, and many others. Shock had supplies of haloperidol and largitol as well, two other major tranquilizers. They had these people just tranquilized and kind of in a hypnotic state. And that's what they were planning on doing, I think, as an experiment to see if they could induce mass suicide. Didn't quite work. I mean, they killed everybody, but I don't think that was... I don't think that necessarily murdering was their ultimate objective. I think they wanted to see if they would do it themselves, and they didn't. And it kind of is testimony to the victims and to real people.
And there's like audio of some of the members saying to Jim Jones, "We're not going to do it," right? And there were people who tried to fight or tried to stop it, right?
Right. Yeah, one in particular, but they gaslighted her, and you can hear it. But unfortunately, she had to shut up. So that's how this Gestalt method works. They can really shout people down. So that they did have that working to make the crowd passive, and
Right.
And that allowed them to make them a little easier to kill them.
Right. And then you mentioned and referenced Michael Myers was Jonestown, a CIA medical experiment. Have you read that book, or you quote it, right?
Yeah, I haven't read the entire book, but I've kind of found some of the key quotes.
Gotcha.
I cite them.
because we know that there was a guy there. I think Jim Jones mentions him, right? Dwyer, who was a
Yes.
stone cold CIA agent, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's just there to kind of observe, apparently. And I don't think that Dwyer, he must have determined that it didn't go quite according to plan. He did get the heck out of there.
Right. And Jim Jones is saying on the recording, he's like, "Get Dwyer out of here," right?
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, here's what Myers says. He says, the article is called "Was Jonestown a CIA Medical Experiment? Review of the Evidence." He says the quantity of psychoactive drugs, together with the meticulous medical records and the layout of the bodies, indicates an attention to detail and evidence that the experimenters wanted to follow. As the cause of death was noted on the medical records of each quote-unquote test person, writes Myers, the corpses were dragged to one side and placed in neat, orderly piles. Of course, part of the experiment was not to test the children, but rather the willingness of mothers to kill their children. Myers, the New England Journal of Medicine commented on the handling of the bodies at Jonestown. He said 6 months after the massacre, only 1/3 of the bodies at Jonestown had been positively identified. No death certificates have been obtained for any of the people who died at Guyana. A medical legal autopsy ought to have been performed on every body to establish the cause and manner of death in each case. In fact, only 7 autopsies were carried out among 713 victims. All the bodies had been embalmed in Guyana using a procedure that ripped up the internal organs. In the end, the physicians were able to certify the cause of death in only 2 of more than 900 cases. And so there's a Guyana law requires an autopsy on any unnatural death, but American officials, so the Americans quickly got into the picture and took the jurisdiction away from the Guyanese. American officials insisted the cause of death was quote unquote readily apparent and additional inquiry was not necessary. Dr. Stormer, then president of the National Association of Medical Examiners, sent an open letter to the U.S. Army complaining about the handling of remains and the illegal cremation of the Jonestown victim. And then they rushed in. It's very strange how they picked up. Here it is. There's a event that went on during the evening of November 18th. So this kind of occurred, I don't know, in the early morning hours, like 1 or 2 in the morning, something like that. And the response was incredibly rapid. Within an hour at 3:04 on November the 19th, a C-141 medevac left Charleston, North Carolina, bound for Guyana. At 3:29 a.m., the JSC chronology indicates that CIA NOAA reports mass suicides at Jonestown. So somehow they learned of mass deaths and claimed suicide while it was still dark, even before the Guyanese Defense Force even arrived at the commune.
Wow.
That's what happens. They just make a lot of mistakes with these operations. They knew. Right. They knew right away.
So they knew this, and it's just really crazy. 1978, and Jones. Jones knew this guy Dwyer, but he also knew Dan Mitrione. Have you ever heard that story?
No.
Okay, Dan Mitrione was some kind of guy who was in the South America training people. He was either a government agent or a CIA agent who trained people on torture. So he was friends with Jones, which is a really weird thing.
Oh, is he the guy that he hooked up in Belo Horizonte, Brazil?
Yeah, I think so. That's it. Exactly.
Okay.
That was in Mitrione. But for Jones, like you have Jones as a very far left kind of Marxist. It's very strange because the People's Temple, he was actually, you would think at first he was a Christian, but he wasn't, right? He didn't believe in God. He thought he was God, right? You ever hear him give that speech?
He was basically a grifter. He just stole money from people. He would take their assets. He was just a full-born criminal. And I think he was using the religion thing as a cover to kind of fool people, because his original con was faith healing and healing people. and mind reading. And so when he was in Indiana, he really had a big following because of that, because people were really sucked into it. He had a good shtick of magic that he'd learned. And then he turned to grifting, especially when he went to San Francisco, and forgeries and blackmail and just assassinations. I mean, he invented gang stalking. He was one of the originals on that. He's very predatory. He was deviant. He was an addict, drug addict. He was sadistic. There was nothing good about him whatsoever. It was just total control and seeing what he can
get away with, right?
Now, the only question I have on him: did they get him in such a paranoid state down there? And I'm still having toss up on this. That maybe the CIA kind of coerced him and got him just kind of, to just go off the deep end,
right?
Through different, because he wasn't sleeping. They could have been doing all kinds of things to him. They could have had somebody even within the compound. We don't really even know the whole story, because he went downhill so fast. He was 57 years old when he allegedly died. And by the way, I do have a photo of my article of the last picture ever taken of. It's kind of down at the bottom of the page.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, I see
that. That doesn't look all that convincing to me.
Yeah, it could be him. It could be somebody else.
Why is his shirt pulled up? Was he dragged into this pose by the shirt? You can't really see his face. You can't really see any blood.
Yeah, no, it's really crazy. And he was making like tons of money from welfare payments. Like he would get everybody's social security's check who was with the People's Temple, right?
Right.
And I think you wrote that some people died mysteriously, like suicided, like a classic cult type thing where somebody dies, right?
Well, I mean, who would know down in Guyana? Who would ever know? And he was doing it up in California. I mean, I think he killed that one lady. He literally took over the Mendocino welfare department. And so I'd sent you a little clip from this Let's Roll forums where they're talking about that. Let me bring that up. This is before. Okay, so this is before when he's still up in California.
Let's see if I can find that.
Okay, let's pop up here. I got this brand new computer. It's supposed to be really popping up. Anyway,
Jones infiltration of there.
Yeah, go ahead and read through that part I sent you.
Webarchive.org. Let's see if I can find this. But he was in Ukiah. Was Ukiah in
California?
In Mendocino County. Okay, gotcha. It's not popping up. It's something wrong with the website. It's not handling with a request. Okay, it's on archive somewhere. But anyway, so he was involved in that. He just was involved in all skullduggery, and he put himself out there as some kind of man of the people, right? So,
well, he was also one of the original social justice warrior frauds of all time. I mean, a lot of people have been following his model on that, because everything is about social justice and racial justice, and running that. The whole boogeyman thing. He's always scaring people, telling them the Ku Klux Klan's going to show up, and a lot of that. When I read that, it just sounds so familiar with what we're experiencing today. Manufactured boogeyman.
Right. It's always somebody else. It's not him, right? It's not them.
Well, he used it. He used it to control people and terrorize people and get him. You create this victimhood stance. He said the paratroopers are coming and they're gonna kill your babies. He says that in what's called the death tape.
Right. I mean, there's just so much. Yeah, the whole Jonestown, and I mean, you want to talk about getting people away from stuff? Isn't that the whole point of Jonestown? Is that all these people are away from their families and stuff in Northern California, so they're just all one big, easily manipulable group?
Well, I mean, on his face, it sounds like it might. These are desperate people. He would find desperate people. People that would hit bottom, drug addicts, homeless people, and he would kind of bring them back enough so that they had a little bit of self-respect, and then he would just take complete control of their lives. So if you're in that boat, I mean, when you think about it, if you're homeless and life has no hope, and you have a part of being a community down in, creating your own life, it kind of has some appeal for somebody like that. But, you have to be under the tutelage of a decent human being, not a bunch of CIA controlled hoods and criminals. This is one of the worst criminal operations I've covered, and I've covered some dandies in my work.
Yeah, it's really something else. I mean, 800 people died. Like, it's just
914, right?
914. Wow, with kids and stuff like that, like just everybody. And they were laid out way too. When they were found, they were like stacked out. Like, it didn't look like a natural group of deaths, did it?
No, I don't think so. I'm pretty convinced that he killed them, or most of them. Maybe he got some of them to drink the Kool-Aid. But you notice how quickly they run the psyops of don't drink the Kool-Aid?
Yeah.
That's the first thing that comes into people's minds when they hear this story. And that's another lie.
Right. Because it's not really the Kool-Aid. It's that they were injected with a bunch of drugs or something. Right. There's a picture of him out there, like he's in like a commissary or something. And there's a big box of Kool-Aid inside like a refrigerator or something like that, like foreshadowing what was coming, or at least symbolically foreshadowing. But what other kind of
that's the backstory they ran.
Right.
They also discredited Mark Lane. But that was another benefit, and got rid of Congressman Ryan, because they lured him down there and assassinated him. And it was more advantageous to destroy Mark Lane's career rather than his life. He was within days of proving the conspiracy against Martin Luther King. So they got rid of two major opponents of covert CIA operations at the same time.
Wow. 1, 2. Yeah. Ryan was, I think he was like, didn't he have some kind of like conflict with Dick Cheney? I think it was in his notes or something like that. So all these kind of deep state type people back then, 78. I think that some of these weird things, I think the Symbionese Liberation Army was 74. So this is not kind of outside of like the 70s. Manson was 69. So there still were weird operations and weird things happening in California. Those are just three notable ones. There probably are other strange.
Well, why was Jim Jones so successful in politics? Now, they say that he was able to bring his followers to support campaigns. I don't know how much money he would give candidates, because he was greedy as heck. And
I don't either, but there's pictures of him with Willie Brown and Moscone.
Well, who are those people?
Right. There's a lot of good questions, man.
Who is Willie Brown? Willie Brown is the boyfriend of Kamala Harris. I mean, it just keeps the former boyfriend. It just keeps going.
Keeps getting stranger and stranger. Well, I think that they were closer to 78 when she was his boyfriend too. I can't remember when he was the mayor or whatever, but strange bedfellows, man. Really strange. And like, didn't Jones was kind of like Paul into polyamory too, right? He had like 9 different children, right?
Well, it wasn't exactly polyamory for himself, not for anybody else.
Gotcha.
He wasn't truly about free love. It was just he could take anybody's woman and have his way with her. So it was a very selfish type of thing, and it didn't work. It really didn't work. It just created a lot of conflicts, including some major conflicts that really helped bring him down, brought a lot of pressure down on him, including the husband of Phyllis, Shacky, the nurse that was one of the principal assassinations. He broke away because of his treatment of their marriage and became very rebellious. But then he got lured back down to Jonestown and was murdered.
Wow.
Possibly even before this night. This bad night.
Wow, interesting. So they were trying to get people down there to do the whole revolutionary suicide trying to get. I mean, that's probably why Ryan came down. Was there? That was the main target, right?
I have to believe that he was lured down there and that was timed.
It was time to kill him as a
time
CIA
to kill him and blow
opponent.
the whole program up, do the revolutionary suicide. But you know, it was definitely what I call a very shoddy operation. The management was real poor. They lived in small, crowded communal houses, and they ate. You know, you keep hearing about the Great Reset of eating lentils now. That's kind of the joke. Well, that's what they ate: rice and lentils.
Wow.
With sauce and eggs, and they would suffer from dysentery. But he was so caught up in his little routine that he didn't have time to actually manage the compound, the commune. And it actually wasn't doing too bad until he showed up and kind of disrupted everything. But by the time he died, he'd been reduced by drugs into a babbling, incoherent mess. And if you listen to that death tape, you can hardly even understand him half the time. He slurs his words, speaks with marbles in his mouth. What gets me about this whole thing is who are the flying monkeys? There's not too much said about his assistants, the minions. Who is Jim McElvain, for example? A former therapist and brainwasher hack had arrived in Jonestown only 2 days earlier, and he was a major player in making this a beautiful day, and he was out there preaching to the choir about reincarnation, new age hocus pocus. Where did he come from?
It's a good question.
It's hard to get. There's kind of dead ends in research on people like this.
Right. Like, where are all these strange people around him? How did he know Dwyer? Like, those are good. Those are important questions. Like, he wasn't a public figure.
I mean, he picked some of them off the streets. This goon that, you know, the male doctor, what was his name?
Shocked or whatever.
Shocked. It was he picked him off out of a drug rehab and then sent him down to Guadalajara, give him a little bit of medical training down there, and then took him with him. So he was organizing awful lot of flying monkeys to do nothing but no good. Not to run a successful commune and successful farm, but to control and kill and do harm to people.
Did we talk? Roberta Glasses joined us. Did we talk about how problem followers were drugged into compliance? Did you cover any of that or come across any of that?
The who?
If there were troubled, or problem people, problem members of the People's Temple, were they drugged to get in compliance? We did mention earlier, or Russ did, that they had tons of drugs. Like, they had mountains of all kinds of different drugs, right? Sodium pentothal, chlorohydrate, demerol,
absolutely. Yeah, they're using it on people.
They're using it on people, yeah. Have you ever heard of any elite or wealthy families that funded the Guyana operation?
Good question. No, I don't really know.
He's at one asked, didn't one have connections to Nazi death camps? Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know.
It seems like these little foundations and NGOs get involved in everything. That's just so universal when you start digging into these stories. So, I'm sure somebody might have given him contributions, but it was self-sufficient because he just stole it from all of his members. He had there's $26 million in bank accounts that was being raided after he supposedly died. So he may have just flown the coop somewhere and gone down to Paraguay or whatever and is
just living it up. Like they had a double and got out. I heard the same thing about the Symbionese army. Is that Symbionese army or Liberation Army? Is that the house got burned down in L.A., but some of the people got out the back. Their bodies weren't found. I've heard stories about that too. That was probably an Operation Chaos Op, CIA op. Much like Jonestown. How long was Jones in Northern California? I don't even know offhand, but he was there for a number of years.
I think about 5 years, because
Right.
he went to Brazil, then he came back to Indiana, and then he went to Northern California. I think it's 71, something like that.
And see, this places him in California during that whole Operation Chaos operation stuff that supposedly ties into Manson, definitely ties into Symbionese Army. That was totally government created. The really good book is Schreiber's Revolution's End. Highly recommend people check. You should check that out, Russ. It's really good because I think it's right around this time. It happened right in Northern California.
See, another little grift that you can run is our life insurance scams.
Right.
And if you could get somebody to insure this flock of people down there, and then in some ways pay out benefits and under darkness, you could raise a lot of money that way.
Right.
I mean, I would think if that many people died in 1 hour, then life insurance fraud has to be considered.
Right. No, good point. Yeah, we mentioned a couple doctors. Shaq was one of the doctors, and then there was another one called Chaikin.
Yeah,
So
she was the nurse. She was the nurse.
Right. So there was definitely something going on. Anybody have any other questions or anything? Is there anything you'd like to add, Russ? I mean, we're at about 36 minutes. Anything you'd like to sum up with?
Just a few little comments about his worldview. He acted as a New Age one world messiah, preaching that he was the reincarnation of Gandhi, Father Divine, Jesus, Buddha, and Vladimir Lenin. I mean, what a hodgepodge.
Yeah, interesting choices.
And so what he tried to promulgate was his belief of what he called the translation, where he and his followers would all die together and move to another planet and live blissfully. And so he was trying to promote Marxism in the United States by mobilizing people through religion, but citing Mao Zedong as his inspiration. And his own wife stated that Jim used religion to try to get some people out of the opiate of religion, and had slammed the Bible on the table, yelling, "I've got to destroy this paper idol." So he spoke openly against religion. And some people didn't like it. I mean, he lost a lot of his followers.
Interesting.
The allure kind of wore thin, but he would terrorize anybody that would leave the temple, the church. He would gang stalk them.
I saw one of his speeches or sermons in San Francisco. He says I am God. It's on YouTube. Like, there's no God, I am God, or something like that. Really aggressively too. So
yeah, that's Discordian nihilism that these people just live for. Just a few more little things about him. He was even those who remain loyal to Jones, insisting that he was somehow, quote unquote, misunderstood, lament his enthusiasm for sexually humiliating those who displeased him, not occasionally by resorting to sodomy, homosexual sodomy, rape. In December of 1973, he was arrested and charged with soliciting a man for sex in a movie theater restroom near MacArthur Park in L.A. He incorporated weaponized sex as part of his trauma-based abuse. Sex among temple members outside of marriage was banned, yet he set up a different standard for himself and voraciously engaged in sexual relationships with both male and female temple members. He claimed that he detested engaging in homosexual activity, but did so only for the male temple adherents' own good, purportedly to connect them symbolically with him. So he tried to control everybody. He had this cuckolding kink going on to humiliate and control his underlings and break down family ties. And he sired 9 children with different women. And then shitstorms over the children became a constant bone of contention with the whole operation. And like I said, over time, the cuckolding backfired as the targeted men revolted, with several becoming stiff opposition and enemies. Children were generally surrendered to communal care, and at times were only allowed to see their real parents briefly at night. Jones is called father or dad by both adults and children. And of course, San Francisco was a big New Age social experimentation, and became influential in politics. Bad things can tend to happen to those that stood up to the church. He controlled the Mendocino County Welfare Department. He had spies in there, so it was infiltration and infestation of practically the whole county. He enjoyed public support and contact with some of the highest level politicians in the United States. So don't these people vet anybody? Mondale,
Good question.
Governor, Moonbeam Brown. I mean, it just amazes me when I do this kind of research how little vetting of these kind of evil people. It's almost like an attraction. It's the opposite.
Yeah,
that's my conspiracy theories. That's my conspiracy theories running amok there, William.
Well, I mean, I think that like Carter was pictured with him and that other serial killer from the Midwest, John Wayne Gacy.
Yeah,
so there's like pictures of her with two total maniacs. There's probably more people involved in the Gacy killings too, which is a whole other disturbing thing. I'm at 40 minutes. I got to run pretty fast. How do you want to wrap this up? Is there anything you'd like to add? I mean, where can people find this article and your other excellent articles on mind control?
Well, the article I just is an older article. It's called the Jonestown Massacre. If you enter that under search, it'll come up. And then I would also recommend reading an article called the Cornerstone. It's called Cornerstone Article to the Reading of Winterwatch: The Tavistock Method of Brainwashing and Social Psychiatry. Again, an older article, but you can find it under research. But actually, if you check tomorrow, I'm going to go ahead and put this call up on my site. And I'll link to those two articles tomorrow.
Great. And it's winterwatch.net, right? So
right.
If people want to reach out to you as well, they can just contact you through that, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. And again, it's Russ Winterwatch. And the title of the article and the subject was Jonestown. But this article that I saw was the Jonestown Massacre, a horrific Tavistock-style brainwashing experiment. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, William. Bye-bye.
All right, take care.